A man stands outside the apartment door at midnight, not to visit. He carries a knife, a rage, and the memory of a woman he believed belonged to him. Inside, Ivy Mercer huddles on the kitchen floor, clutching her phone, her heart pounding. She has a phone number, a single number she swore she would never dial. But tonight, as the door begins to shake from the banging, she realizes she has no choice. Like and comment the city you're viewing from so I know how far this story has progressed. And stay until the end, because tonight isn't over yet. Rain had been falling on Chicago's south side since early afternoon, the kind of rain that didn't care about anyone. Cold, relentless, drumming against the cracked window glass of apartment 4C like it was trying to get inside too. The streetlights below were smeared across the wet asphalt in long orange streaks. The hallway outside smelled like mildew and somebody's old dinner and something else Ivy couldn't name, something sharp and metallic, the way a bad night smells before it becomes a worse one. She was on the kitchen floor, not sitting, crouching, back pressed against the cabinet under the sink where the pipes groaned whenever the upstairs neighbor ran water. Her knees were pulled to her chest. The linoleum was cold through the thin fabric of her jeans, and she could feel every crack and seam of it against her ankles. The overhead light had been flickering for the last 20 minutes, a slow death that made the shadows in the corners pulse and swell like breathing things. The phone in her hand had 11% battery left. She'd been staring at that number for 3 months. The pounding on the front door came again. Not knocking, not anymore. This was fists against hollow wood, rhythmic and patient in the worst way, the kind of patience that came from certainty, from the absolute conviction that the door would open eventually. "Ivy," his voice filtered through the cheap wood like smoke. "I know you're in there. Your lights are on." Caleb Voss. She hadn't seen his face in 93 days. She'd counted. The first week after she left, she counted every single one of those days. Like each number was a small wall she was building between herself and everything that happened in that other apartment. The one on Halstead, where the walls had learned to absorb sound, and the neighbors had learned to keep their televisions loud. She'd moved 3 times since then, changed her number twice, told no one at her new waitressing job where she actually lived. Somehow, he'd still found her. The assault charges hadn't stuck. She'd known they wouldn't. She'd made the mistake of believing the detective who told her it would be straightforward, that the bruising on her wrists was documentation enough, that the neighbor's statement would hold. It didn't. Caleb had a lawyer who wore expensive suits and spoke in a voice so reasonable it made Ivy feel like the unreasonable one. Bail was set. The charges were pending, but Caleb was out. And when Caleb was out and angry, the world reorganized itself around that anger. She pressed herself harder against the cabinet. The flickering light above her buzzed and then died completely. The apartment went black. For a moment there was nothing but the rain and the sound of her own breathing and Caleb's voice on the other side of the door, lower now, the fake patience gone. "Open the damn door, Ivy." Her thumb moved across the cracked screen of her phone. The glow of it was the only light in the kitchen. She'd saved the number without a name, just a single initial, L, sitting in her contacts like a splinter she'd never worked up the nerve to pull out. She'd put it there 3 months ago, the last night she ever worked at the private casino lounge on the near north side, the night she'd finally made herself leave and never go back. Lucian Moretti had given her the number himself. She hadn't asked for it. She'd been clearing glasses from a private booth near the back of the lounge when he appeared at her elbow, not startling her exactly, more like materializing, the way a shadow does when a light shifts. He was 38 years old, and he moved through a room like he'd already mapped every exit. Dark suit, white shirt without a tie. Eyes that were calm in a way that wasn't peaceful. More like the calm of deep water, where the stillness on the surface doesn't tell you anything about what's below. He'd noticed the bruises on her wrists 6 weeks before that. He hadn't said anything then. He'd simply moved the cuff of his jacket to adjust his watch and looked away. And Ivy had gone back to clearing glasses and pretending she hadn't seen him notice. But the last night, he'd stopped her. He hadn't touched her. He'd stood at a distance that felt deliberate, like he was conscious of how men taking up space near her felt. And he'd said quietly, without making it into anything dramatic, "If you're ever truly afraid, call me." She'd taken the card he held out. She told herself she never would. The door to the apartment shuddered. The chain lock. The flimsy one she'd bought at the hardware store for $12 and screwed in herself with a butter knife because she didn't own a proper screwdriver, rattled in its housing. Ivy's thumb pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Ivy!" His voice was immediate. Not surprised, like he'd been half expecting this call for months, like he'd kept a part of himself on standby for it. Her throat locked. She hadn't planned what to say. She hadn't planned any of this. "Can you come get me?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended, cracked at the edges. She hated how it sounded. She hated needing to make this call. She hated the $12 chain lock and the flickering light and the bruises that were already fading from her wrists but hadn't fully disappeared yet. Silence on the line. Not the silence of hesitation. Something different. The silence of someone already calculating. "Stay away from the windows," Lucian said. His voice was steady, completely steady. "I'm already on my way." The call ended. Ivy pulled her knees tighter against her chest and listened to the chain lock groan. Tug. The black SUV was doing 70 on the Dan Ryan before Matteo Rizzi finished his sentence. "This is a mistake, like..." Matteo said it the way he said most things, say, flat, declarative, without ornamentation. He was 41 years old and had been Lucian's enforcer for 11 years, and he'd earned the right to say difficult things plainly. He was also right more often than Lucian liked to acknowledge. "You're exposing yourself. The Serrano people have been watching your movements since the ceasefire collapsed. You drive to the south side tonight personally. You hand them a map." Lucian's hands stayed at 10 and 2 on the wheel. The windshield wipers beat against the rain. "I heard you," he said. "That's not the same as agreeing with me." "No," Lucian said. "It's not." Matteo leaned back against the seat and looked out the side window at the wet city sliding past. He'd known Lucian since before the Empire, since before the first club, before the first territory dispute, before the thing that happened to Elena that changed Lucian in ways that never fully reversed. He knew which arguments to press and which ones to let go. This one, he could already see, was in the second category. He pressed it anyway. "She's a waitress," Matteo said. "Not your problem." "I made her my problem." Lucian took the exit without slowing. 3 months ago when I gave her that number. "You give out your number to half the people who work your floors. That doesn't mean..." "I don't," Lucian said. "I don't give out my number." Matteo went quiet. The SUV behind them, 2 of Lucian's men, Dario and a younger guy named Fetch, who'd been with them 8 months, kept pace through the rain. 4 men total for what should have been a quiet extraction. It wasn't enough if things went sideways, and they both knew it, but Lucian hadn't wanted to mobilize more without knowing what he was walking into. He knew what he was walking into. He'd known the night he gave her the number. Ivy Mercer had come to work at the casino lounge 14 months ago, one of 12 floor staff. Lucian didn't involve himself in hiring, that was managed, but he noticed people. It was a survival skill that had calcified into reflex. He noticed the way she held herself slightly turned at the shoulder, like she was always halfway braced for something. He noticed the long sleeves in June. He noticed the way she tracked the room differently than the other staff, not professionally but watchfully, the way someone watches a room when they've learned that rooms can change suddenly. He'd run her name the same week, not intrusively, or he'd told himself it wasn't intrusive, which was a partial lie. What he found was a woman who'd spent 2 years in a situation the system had completely failed to help her exit, and a boyfriend with a sheet that documented escalating violence and escalating bail amounts, and a pattern that anyone paying attention could read clearly. Lucian had paid attention. He hadn't intervened. That wasn't his role, and inserting himself uninvited into a woman's circumstances was its own kind of violation. But he'd kept his peripheral awareness on her, and when she finally stopped showing up for shifts, when someone from his management team noted that Ivy Mercer had apparently quit without notice, Lucian had felt something he didn't have a clean word for. Something that sat between relief and dread. He'd hoped she'd gotten out clean. The card he gave her the last night she worked was a hedge against the possibility that she hadn't. The SUV turned off the main road and into the neighborhood. The buildings here were tired, not dangerous so much as depleted, the kind of urban exhaustion that settles into a place when the money that was supposed to come back never comes back. Ivy's building was mid-block, a 6-story structure with a busted intercom panel and half its parking lot cordoned off with orange cones. Lucian cut the headlights 2 blocks out. He pulled to the curb and sat for 3 seconds reading the building. Windows, exits, the fire escape on the east wall, the alley alongside the parking lot. He handed Mateo his phone. "She's on the 4th floor," he said. "Northeast corner. He's been there at least 20 minutes, based on when she called." Mateo checked the magazine on his weapon and said nothing. They moved. The chain lock had been wrong about how long it could hold. It lasted another 4 minutes after Ivy ended the call. She knew because she was watching the battery on her phone drain and marking time against it the way people mark time when they have nothing to do but wait and be afraid. Then the screws pulled out of the door frame with a sound like a staple gun, a sharp crack and a clatter, and the door swung hard against the interior wall. Ivy pressed herself flatter against the cabinet. Caleb stepped into the dark apartment. She could hear him breathing, that particular quality to his breathing she'd spent 2 years learning, the way it changed when he was drinking and when he wasn't, the way it changed when he was looking for a fight versus when the fight had already happened, and the adrenaline was draining. Right now, it was the hunting kind, controlled, deliberate. "You changed the locks," he said. His voice moved through the kitchen doorway. "I like how you really thought that was going to matter." She didn't answer. The kitchen was small, 6 feet by 8 feet, and she was behind the island counter, which was nothing, which was plywood over 2x4s and would stop exactly nothing. She could hear him moving through the dark living room, touching things. She could hear the particular sound of him picking something up and setting it back down, the way he did when he was scanning a space. "I know you called someone," Caleb said. "I saw the glow under the door." "Who'd you call, Ivy? Your sister?" "Your sister's in Memphis and she's got her own problems." A pause. He was closer now. By the couch, maybe. "Who else you got?" The power in the building died completely. Not just her apartment, but the whole building. The whole block outside. The orange streetlights going out all at once, so that the only light anywhere was the cold blue-gray of the rain-soaked night through the windows. Headlights swept the hallway. More than one set. Caleb stopped moving. The headlights outside didn't pass. They stopped. Caleb crossed to the window and looked down at the street, and something changed in his breathing. A shift so slight she almost missed it, but she'd learned to read him in low resolution, to catch every microsignal because those signals were the only early warning system she'd ever had. She heard the change, and she knew he'd seen something that scared him. He stepped back from the window. "Who did you call?" he said again, and this time it wasn't rhetorical. Footsteps on the stairwell, measured, unhurried. The footsteps of someone who didn't need to rush because rushing suggested you weren't sure of the outcome. Caleb found her in the dark. She didn't have time to move. He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and grabbed her arm, the left one, the one that still had a yellow-green bruise fading out along the inside of the wrist, and he yanked her to her feet hard enough that her shoulder screamed. The apartment door opened. Light from a phone, not a flashlight, just a phone screen, held low, illuminated the doorway. Lucian Moretti stood there in the dark hallway. He wasn't large in the way that was supposed to be intimidating. He wasn't filling the door frame or broadcasting threat. He was simply present with a completeness that made the room feel different. A kind of total occupation of space that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with the quality of his stillness. Caleb pulled Ivy against him, her back to his chest, his right arm across her throat. She felt something cold and flat press against her jaw. The knife. She'd known he had it. She'd heard it earlier, heard the particular sound of it when he was going through her things, and some part of her had been bracing for this contact for the last half hour. Nobody moved. Lucian's eyes went to Ivy first, not to Caleb, to her. A quick, thorough scan, the kind that was cataloging damage, reading her status. His face was very still. Then he looked at Caleb. "Let her go," Lucian said. The quiet in his voice was not gentle. "You walk out of here. You leave breathing." Caleb's arm tightened across her throat. She felt his chest moving rapidly against her back. The adrenaline burning through him, the bravado curdling into something less stable. "You're Moretti," Caleb said. His voice was working hard to hold steady. "The Lucian Moretti. You're really here for her? This is what you do on a Tuesday night?" Lucian didn't answer that. "The knife," he said. "Put it down." "Or what?" Caleb laughed. A short, ugly sound. "You shoot me. You hit her." "I won't shoot you," Lucian said. The certainty in it was worse than a threat. Caleb's grip shifted. She felt him recalculating. The nervous energy in his body changing texture, moving from aggression towards something more erratic, and therefore more dangerous. She knew this state. She'd lived in proximity to it for 2 years. This was the state where things that couldn't be taken back happened. "Caleb," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Don't! Shut up! Look at where you are," she said. "Look at what you're doing." "I said, shut." He moved suddenly, dragging her sideways toward the fire escape window. She felt the cold handle of the knife slide along her jaw as he repositioned. Lucian crossed the room in the same moment, not running, moving, controlled and fast. And Caleb kicked the window out and pulled her through into the rain and the noise of the storm and the iron cold of the fire escape landing. And they were outside, and the city opened up beneath them, wet and enormous and indifferent. And somewhere below in the alley, headlights swept across the darkness, and then the headlights became something else entirely. The first gunshot cracked through the rain like a breaking bone. Then the second. Then the alley below the fire escape erupted into chaos, and Ivy understood, with the sudden terrible clarity that only arrives in the worst moments, that Caleb Voss and his knife were no longer the most dangerous thing in this night. Lucian appeared at the broken window behind them as the third shot punched through the railing 2 feet from Ivy's head. He grabbed Caleb's knife arm, not the wrist, the elbow, a specific grip that Caleb couldn't resist without dropping the blade, and Caleb dropped it. It rang off the iron grating and fell into the darkness below. Caleb swung. Lucian absorbed it, turned his body, and put Caleb into the exterior wall of the building with controlled force, enough to daze, not enough to keep him down, because there wasn't time. More gunfire from the alley. Mateo's voice below, sharp and clipped, calling positions. Lucian pulled Ivy away from the railing. "Don't look down," he said. She looked down anyway. The alley was lit by the muzzle flashes of at least 6 weapons. She saw Mateo behind the rear wheel of the SU-5, returning fire toward a line of vehicles that had appeared at the alley entrance. Black cars, unfamiliar, arranged with the practiced geometry of an ambush. Dario was down behind a dumpster. The younger one, Fetch, was moving along the wall, trying to flank. "They knew you were coming," she said. "Yes," Lucien said. "They knew you'd come for me." He didn't answer that. He was reading the fire escape, calculating angles, his hand on her arm firm but not punishing. "Can you run?" he asked. Ivy thought of everything she'd survived in the last 2 years. The apartment on Halstead, the detective who didn't believe her, the 3 moves, the changed numbers, the 109 days since she'd last been in a room with Caleb Voss. "Yes," she said. They ran. 3 floors up, 2 floors down the back stairwell, while Caleb Voss disappeared somewhere into the building, fled or hid, she didn't know, didn't have the bandwidth to care. Lucian moved her through the service door at the base of the stairs, and out through a utility corridor that exited into the next block's parking structure. 2 of his people, faces she didn't recognize, materialized from the shadows and bracketed them without a word. The gunfire was still audible, muffled now by concrete and distance. Ivy was soaking wet. Her arm ached from Caleb's grip. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Lucian stopped in the shelter of the parking structure's first floor, turned to face her, and looked at her the same way he had from the apartment doorway. That quick, cataloging look that wasn't quite clinical because it had something else in it, something she didn't have the right word for. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." She pressed her shaking hands flat against her thighs. "What just happened?" "Someone told my enemies I was coming here tonight." His voice was as steady as it had been in the apartment, but she could see the muscles in his jaw working. They planned around it. She understood what he wasn't saying. "They planned around me," she said. "I'm why they knew to come." He didn't deny it. "We need to move," he said. I'll explain everything when we're clear of this neighborhood. Can you keep moving? She looked back toward the building, toward the sound of the shots, toward the place where 3 months of carefully constructed distance had just collapsed in the span of 20 minutes. I don't have anything, she said. My bag is up there. None of that matters tonight. She knew he was right. She knew it with the same certainty she'd known the moment she pressed the call button. The same certainty that had told her the $12 chain lock was already the end of one version of her life. Some doors, once broken, don't reattach. She looked at Lucian Moretti standing in the dark parking structure with the rain dripping off the brim of his collar and the distant gunfire still punctuating the night behind them. Okay, she said. They moved toward the waiting car. Above them, in the wet dark of a sixth-floor window, Caleb Voss watched them go. His phone already in his hand, a number already dialing, his mind already working the only trade he had left to make. He'd recognized the cars in the alley. He knew who they belonged to. And he knew exactly what Ivy Mercer had overheard 3 months ago in a back office on Halstead Street. Exactly what she'd seen on a laptop screen that wasn't meant for her eyes. Names, numbers. A ledger that connected 3 crime families and a federal prosecutor and a ghost account in the Cayman Islands. Information like that was currency. And Caleb Voss had just found someone who would pay for it. They put her in the back of a car she didn't recognize and drove north without explaining where they were going. Lucian sat in the front passenger seat, not next to her, in front of her, separated by headrest and silence, which felt deliberate in a way she couldn't decide was considerate or dismissive. The 2 men she didn't know occupied the driver's seat and the position beside her in the back. The one next to her was young, maybe 25, with a jaw that looked like it had been broken and reset at least once. He stared straight ahead. His shoulder touched hers when the car turned, and he didn't apologize. Ivy looked out the rain-streaked window. The south side scrolled past and then disappeared, and the city changed the way it did when money started accumulating. The buildings getting newer, the streetlights more evenly spaced, the trees planted with actual intention. She wrapped her arms around herself because she was wet through to the skin and shaking, and she wasn't sure anymore how much of the shaking was cold versus the other thing, the thing that lived in your nervous system after prolonged exposure to fear and expressed itself as trembling even when the immediate danger had passed. Her phone was at 4%. She looked at it. She thought about calling her sister in Memphis, and then she thought about what she would say. She thought about the $12 lock. She thought about the screws pulling out of the door frame. She turned the phone face down on her thigh. Mateo got in a different car. She'd seen him briefly in the parking structure. Blood on his collar from a graze across the left side of his neck. The kind of wound that announced itself as not serious with the same energy as someone insisting they were fine through clenched teeth. He'd looked at her with an expression that wasn't hostility exactly. More like the look someone gives a weather system they've been warning about for months. The drive took 40 minutes. She didn't ask where they were going. Asking felt like it would cost something she didn't have the reserves to spend. The estate appeared at the end of a private road that wasn't marked on anything she'd ever seen. Stone gateposts, iron gates that opened before the car reached them, operated by someone she never saw. The grounds were dark except for pathway lighting along the drive, and then the house materialized from the darkness. Not ostentatious, not the kind of thing that announced wealth by screaming it, but large and deeply settled into its lot. 3 stories of dark brick and steel-framed windows overlooking a terrace that faced the lake. She could hear the water before she saw it. Lake Michigan in the rain. Immense and restless, the sound of it like breathing. A woman met them at the side entrance. 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back, the practiced efficiency of someone who had been managing complicated arrivals at odd hours for a long time. She didn't introduce herself. She handed Ivy a folded towel and a change of clothes, dark sweatpants, a plain long-sleeve shirt, wool socks. Without comment, the way someone hands you what you need when they've correctly read the situation and decided conversation can come later. Ivy took them. "Room at the end of the hall," the woman said. "Second floor. There's a lock on the door. Use it if you want." Ivy looked at her. "I'm Roz," the woman said. "I run the household. Bathroom has hot water. It'll take 2 minutes to heat up. You look like you need it." Ivy nodded. Her throat felt sealed. She went upstairs alone. "What?" The bathroom was white tile and steel fixtures, and the hot water took exactly 2 minutes as promised. She stood under it for a long time, longer than she had any practical reason to, until the shaking in her hands downgraded from visible to internal. She examined herself in the mirror after. The bruise on her wrist from Caleb's grip tonight was new and dark, layered on top of the fading yellow-green of the old ones. Her hair was dripping. She looked like someone who had been through something, which she had, and she thought about the face she was looking at and tried to remember the last time it had looked like nothing was wrong. She couldn't place it. She got dressed in the clothes Roz had left. They fit approximately, which was good enough. She sat on the edge of the bed in the room at the end of the hall, and she listened to the rain against the windows and the lake beyond them, and she tried to decide how afraid she should still be. The door was locked. She'd used the lock. She was afraid of the wrong man now, and she wasn't sure when that had shifted. Lucian was in the kitchen when she came back downstairs at 2 a.m, unable to sleep, unwilling to lie in the dark with her own thoughts. He was standing at the island counter with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was reading something on a tablet he set face down when she appeared in the doorway. His shirt had a dark stain along the left forearm that she realized after a moment was blood. Not his. The way it was distributed, the angle, she didn't think it was his. He looked up. Couldn't sleep, she said. It wasn't a question, and she wasn't apologizing for it. There's coffee, he said. Or I can have Roz, coffee's fine. I can get it. She crossed to the machine on the counter and found a mug in the cabinet above it without asking where the mugs were. She needed to do that, to navigate this space herself, to not be handed everything, to retain at least the functional autonomy of getting her own cup of coffee at 2 a.m. in a stranger's house. She poured. She stood at the counter and drank it black because there wasn't a reason to go looking for milk. Lucian watched her with the careful attention he'd given her in the apartment doorway, that quality of observation that never felt predatory because it was too deliberate, too controlled, like it was always examining rather than wanting. You should have someone look at your arm, she said. It's not mine. I know. She looked at the stain. Whose? A beat. Fetch, he said. The young one. He took a round in the shoulder. He'll be all right. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Someone told them you were coming, she said. That's what you said. Yes. Who knew? Lucian's jaw moved. That's what I'm trying to determine. How many people knew you were going there tonight? Matteo, 3 other men, possibly someone in my communications infrastructure. He said it evenly, but she could hear the thing under the evenness, the controlled fury of someone who has been betrayed and is not yet certain by whom. So someone in your own organization? She set the mug down. Someone who could get to Serrano's people fast enough to set up an ambush in, she did the math, less than 40 minutes. Lucian looked at her. You're faster than I expected, he said. Don't do that, she said. Do what? Sound surprised that I can think. She picked the mug back up. I've been surviving on my own capacity to read situations for 2 years. I'm not slow. Something shifted in his expression, not quite an apology, more like a recalibration. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. She hadn't expected the apology, and it sat oddly in the air between them. What did Caleb tell them? She asked. To get them to deal with him. The recalibration in Lucian's expression went somewhere else then, somewhere more careful, more deliberate. We'll talk about that tomorrow, he said, when I know more. Tell me now. Ivy. I was there, she said. Her voice was steady. I was the one with the knife against my face. I have the right to understand what I walked into. Lucian was quiet for 3 seconds. She counted. Caleb reached out to Serrano's people within an hour of finding your apartment, he said. He told them he had information, valuable information that involved you. They don't know yet exactly what he offered them, but given what he has access to, he stopped. Given what I overheard, she said. Silence. She'd known it would come back to this. She'd known it the night she stood in the doorway of the back office on Halstead Street, the night she'd been bringing Caleb's forgotten jacket and instead found him at the laptop with two men she'd never seen, talking in the particular lowered tone that people use when the conversation would ruin them if overheard. She'd stood there for 45 seconds, long enough to see the screen, to see the names, to understand the basic architecture of what she was looking at, before Caleb saw her reflection in the window glass. She'd left the apartment that same night. She'd never told anyone what she'd seen. "They know I saw something," she said. "Caleb told them that." "Yes." "And now they want to know what I know." "Yes." The coffee was cooling in the mug, and the rain was still going outside, and the lake was still making that sound like the world breathing. "So I'm not just Caleb's problem anymore," she said. "No," Lucian said. "You're not." Matteo arrived at the estate at 6:15 in the morning, looking like he hadn't slept, which he hadn't, and like his neck wound was bothering him more than he was willing to admit, which it was. He dropped a folder on the kitchen table where Lucian was sitting with his second coffee and the remnants of a night spent doing what Lucian did when something went wrong, sitting very still and thinking very hard and not talking to anyone about it. "Sit down," Lucian said. "I'm fine standing." Matteo opened the folder. "Serrano's crew hit us with 8 men, coordinated positioning, 2 at the alley entrance, 3 on the roof of the building across the lot, 2 on the street level east, 1 on the fire escape of the building adjacent. That's not improvised. That's planned hours in advance, not 40 minutes. Lucian looked at him. "Hours," he said. "At minimum 4, probably 6. Matteo's voice didn't change. "Someone knew you were going before you decided to go." The kitchen was quiet. "Before I got the call," Lucian said. "Looks that way." Lucian set down the coffee. "So either someone monitored her communications and anticipated, or someone in our circle knew she was going to call, and when." Matteo crossed his arms. "I'm not saying I have a name. I'm saying the ambush was too clean. The positioning was too specific. They knew which building, which floor, which side. Either they've had eyes on her apartment for weeks and planned around any rescue attempt, or someone talked." "Both could be true," Lucian said. "Both could be true." Matteo looked toward the ceiling, the direction of the guest room above them. "The girl upstairs." "Her name is Ivy." "The girl upstairs saw something at Caleb Voss's apartment 3 months ago. Something worth enough that Serrano's people mobilized 8 armed men on 4 hours' notice." He leveled his gaze at Lucian. "I need to know what it was." "So do I." "So ask her." "I will." "Now," Matteo said. "Not when she's rested, not when she's comfortable now. Because Serrano's going to regroup from last night, and when he comes back, he's coming with more than 8 men, and I need to know what we're holding before I can figure out how to defend it." Lucian picked up the coffee again, looked at it, set it back down. "She's not an asset, Matteo. She's not a liability either. Not yet. But she gets there fast if we don't know what she carries." His voice was flat and not unkind in the way that truly unsentimental people deliver hard truths, without pleasure, without apology. "You brought her here. That means whatever she's carrying, we carry now. So we need to know what it is." Upstairs, a door opened and closed, footsteps on the stairs. Ivy appeared in the kitchen doorway in the borrowed clothes, her hair still damp, her eyes clear in the way that eyes go clear after a night of no sleep, past tired and into a strange, stripped alertness. She looked at Matteo. She looked at the folder. She looked at Lucian. "You're talking about me," she said. "Sit down," Lucian said. She came in, but she didn't sit. She stood at the end of the table with her arms loose at her sides and her chin up at the angle it went when she was bracing. Matteo looked at her the way he looked at most things. Appraising, economical, without hostility, but without warmth either. 3 months ago," he said. "Caleb Voss's apartment on Halstead. You saw something. What was it?" She looked at Lucian. "It's a fair question," Lucian said quietly. She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, processing. There was a difference, and he'd already learned to tell them apart. "A laptop screen," she said. "Open spreadsheet. Columns, dates, amounts, account numbers, names in a separate column, 6 or 7 names. I didn't have long enough to read them all." "The names you did read," Matteo said. 2 of them." She said them. 2 names. one belonging to a mid-level figure in the Serrano family's financial infrastructure, one belonging to a sitting federal assistant prosecutor in the Northern District of Illinois. The kitchen went very quiet. Mateo looked at Lucian. Lucian looked at Ivy. "You've been carrying that for 3 months," Lucian said. "I didn't know what to do with it." Her voice was even. "I knew if I went to the wrong person with that prosecutor's name, I was dead. I knew if I went to Caleb with the fact that I'd seen it, I was—" She stopped. "I just left. I thought if I left and stayed quiet, it would be over." "It's not over," Mateo said. "I know that now." She looked at him. "Is it Serrano's money in those accounts? Is that what I saw?" Mateo and Lucian exchanged a look that she caught and cataloged. "Partially," Lucian said. "If the prosecutor's name is on that ledger, it's not just Serrano. That account connects at least 3 families and a federal office that's supposed to be building cases against all of them." He paused. "That information doesn't just end careers, it ends lives." "Whose lives?" she said. "Anyone whose name isn't on it and who the people whose names are on it decide knows too much." She absorbed that. "So Caleb told Serrano I saw it," she said. "And now Serrano doesn't know exactly what I retained, but he can't afford to find out that I retained anything." "That's the calculation, yes." "So this was never about Caleb," she said. The realization in her voice wasn't panicked. It was the particular exhaustion of someone watching a pattern complete itself. "It was never going to end with just Caleb, even if I'd never called you, even if I'd moved again, changed my name." "Probably not," Lucian said. She stood at the end of the table and looked at the folder and looked at Mateo and looked at the window where the morning was coming in gray and wet off the lake. "What do you need from me?" she said. What they needed, it turned out, was everything she remembered. She spent 3 hours at the kitchen table with Mateo and a man named Carver, who arrived at 8 and introduced himself as Lucian's information analyst, which she understood meant something specific and not entirely legitimate. Carver was 50, small-framed, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the particular effect of someone who had spent decades in rooms where knowing things was more powerful than doing things. He asked careful questions. He wrote nothing down. He asked her to describe the spreadsheet layout, not just the content, but the structure, the formatting, the color coding, if any, the font, the presence or absence of headers. She gave him everything she had. Lucian was in and out of the room, mostly out. She could hear his voice elsewhere in the house, phone calls, low and clipped. Mateo's neck wound had been properly dressed at some point during the morning, and he sat across from her with his forearms on the table and his attention absolute. By 11, Carver had built a partial reconstruction. "It matches a ledger architecture we've seen before," he told Lucian quietly in the hallway. She wasn't supposed to hear, but the house's acoustics were better than anyone had accounted for. "Modified double entry, ghost column for the pass-through accounts. This isn't Serrano's native bookkeeping. This is something assembled externally, probably the prosecutor's office structuring it to be legible to financial investigators, but deniable if pulled out of context." "So the prosecutor built the system," Lucian said. "Or someone in his office did. Can we reconstruct enough to be usable?" A pause. "With what she gave us, maybe 60%. Enough to be dangerous. Not enough to be bulletproof." She heard Lucian's exhale. She looked at Mateo, who had also heard. 60% dangerous, she said. Mateo looked at her. "Don't start feeling like a piece of evidence." "I'm not." She straightened in the chair. "I'm thinking about what Caleb offered them. He told them I saw it. He probably told them I'd be able to reconstruct it." She paused. "Which means Serrano thinks I'm a 60% problem that could become a 100% problem." "That's accurate." "And now I'm here." "Also accurate." "Which means, Lucian..." She stopped. Mateo's expression shifted by degrees so small she almost missed them. "Say it," he said, "which means I pulled Lucian into the center of this by calling him." Her voice was steady. "And whoever in his organization tipped Serrano about the rescue, they're going to use me as leverage, not just to get at what I know, to get at him." Mateo was quiet for a long moment. "You really aren't slow," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an acknowledgement, the kind that carried weight precisely because it came from someone who didn't give them out. She thought about the number she'd saved with one initial in her phone. She thought about the card Lucian had given her, the card she'd almost thrown away 4 times and never did. She thought about the particular arithmetic of arriving at someone's door in the middle of the night and what you owed them for what came after. "I need to talk to him," she said. "He's busy." "I know he's busy." She stood up. "I need to talk to him anyway." She found Lucian on the terrace facing the lake. The rain had slowed to a mist. The water was flat and heavy and the color of old iron, and he was standing at the railing with his hands in his pockets, looking at it the way people look at things they aren't really seeing. He heard her come out and turned, not startled, he didn't seem to startle, and waited. She stopped beside him at the railing, not beside him exactly, 6 feet away, which felt right. "I need to say something," she said. He looked at the water. "Whoever tipped Serrano," she said. "Someone in your organization, someone who knew before you even got my call that I was the kind of vulnerability that could be exploited." She paused. "You've had that problem for a while, haven't you? The leak. This isn't the first time." He was quiet. "You don't have to confirm it," she said. "I'm not asking you to." 3 times in the past 8 months, he said. "Smaller things. Things I attributed to coincidence or to Serrano having better intelligence than expected." He turned to look at her, and the morning light was gray and flat off the water, and it showed his face without flattery, the tiredness in it, the specific kind of tired that accumulated from years of managing things that couldn't be set down. "I've been investigating internally. I haven't found it yet. But last night clarified the timeline," she said. "Whoever it is, they moved fast. They have direct access to Serrano." "Yes. And now they know where I am." He held her gaze. "The estate is secure," he said. "Better than anywhere else." "I'm not asking you to move me." She turned back to the water. "I'm saying I understand what I walked into by calling you. I understand what I cost you last night, and I'm not going to pretend that I can just stay here and be kept while you handle it." "Ivy, I saw that ledger," she said. "I have whatever is inside my own memory. That's not nothing." She finally looked at him directly. "Let me be useful." Something moved through his expression. Not surprise this time, something more complicated. Something that had the shape of wanting to refuse and the weight of knowing the refusal would be wrong. "You don't know what you're asking to be part of," he said. "I know exactly what I saw on that screen, and I know what it means." She didn't look away. "I'm already in it, Lucian. The only question is whether I'm in it standing up or waiting in a room upstairs." The mist moved off the lake and touched both of them. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her, back into the house, at where Matteo had appeared in the doorway behind the glass. And the expression on Matteo's face was not one she'd seen before. Tighter, more urgent. He had his phone in his hand. Lucian read it instantly. "What?" he said, moving toward the door. Matteo held up the phone. "A news alert. A photograph." Ivy crossed the terrace and looked at the screen. The photograph was grainy, taken from across a street, but the quality was good enough. It showed the entrance to the parking structure from last night. It showed Lucian's face, partially turned, caught mid-stride. The headline above it read, "Moretti surfaces on South Side. Connection to Tuesday night. Shooting under investigation." The story had been up for 11 minutes. "It gets worse," Matteo said. He scrolled. Another image, this one clearer, taken from a different angle. A woman in dark clothes being guided toward a car, face visible. Wet hair. A bruise visible on one wrist. Ivy looked at her own photograph on Matteo's phone screen. "Serrano didn't put this out," Lucian said, reading Matteo's face. "He'd want to find her first." "No," Matteo agreed. "This came from the prosecutor's office." The 3 of them stood there while the weight of it settled. The assistant U.S. attorney whose name was in Caleb's ledger, the man whose career and freedom depended on that ledger never becoming public record, had just put Ivy Mercer's face in the news. Not to find her, not to question her, to mark her, to tell everyone who needed to know that she existed, that she had been seen with Lucian Moretti, that she was a thread worth pulling. "We need to move her," Matteo said. Tonight. No, Lucian said. Lucian, running confirms she has something. His voice was cold and precise. Running tells them she's afraid and alone and worth chasing. He looked at Ivy. We don't run. Ivy looked at the photograph of herself on the phone screen. She thought about the $12 lock. She thought about counting days. She thought about the version of herself who had believed that staying quiet and staying small and staying invisible was the same as being safe. What do we do instead? She said. Lucian looked at her with something in his expression she hadn't seen there before. Not the calm that came from control, but the particular dangerous clarity of a man who had just decided that the only way through was forward. We give them a reason to be afraid of what she remembers, he said. Before they decide the easiest solution is making sure she can't remember anything, the plan took shape the way most of Lucian's plans did. Not in a single moment of clarity, but in layers, each one laid down over the last, while the picture underneath it shifted and clarified and became something you could act on. Carver spent the rest of Tuesday reconstructing what he could from Ivy's memory. He sat across from her at the kitchen table for 6 hours with a blank legal pad and asked her to walk through the spreadsheet again and again. Not the content first, but the visual. Where was the cursor on the screen? Which column was highlighted? What color were the cell borders? Was the window maximized or reduced? These details, he explained without explaining why, helped locate the file in a specific software environment that could then be cross-referenced with known financial architectures used by the 3 families Lucian had named. She gave him everything. Every time she thought she'd exhausted a detail, she found another one underneath it. The particular font weight of the header row. The way one of the men standing behind Caleb had leaned forward to point at a cell. The ambient sound of another voice somewhere off screen. A phone call. A name repeated twice. By 7 that evening, Carver had enough to be confident about the file's origin. It's a working document, he told Lucian, not a ledger copy. The original, or a Generation 2 derivative, is still active somewhere. The architecture matches a proprietary template that came out of a private accounting firm in Zurich that does work for 2 of the 3 families. He took his glasses off and cleaned them. If it's still active, it's being updated, which means there's a current copy accessible through whoever has administrative credentials. Caleb had a copy on his laptop, Lucian said. Caleb was shown a copy. I'd bet my eyes he doesn't have credentials. He was being given a specific look at a specific window of information, enough to make him feel included, not enough to make him dangerous. Carver put the glasses back on. The dangerous copy is elsewhere. The prosecutor, Ivy said. Carver looked at her. Most likely. So if we can get to the original document, she started. Then we have everything, Lucian said. Names, amounts, dates, the entire pass-through chain. Not a memory reconstruction, not circumstantial, the thing itself. Matteo, standing at the window, turned around. And how exactly do we get to a document that lives inside a federal prosecutor's private infrastructure? Nobody answered immediately. We don't break in, Lucian said. We don't have to. He looked at Carver. The firm in Zurich. Who are the principals? Outside. The next 48 hours had the particular quality of time that moves slowly when you're inside it and impossibly fast when you measure it against what it produced. Lucian worked the phones. Ivy learned what that looked like. He'd sit in the study off the main hallway with the door 3/4 closed, and she'd hear his voice at intervals, never raised, never hurried, always with the same quality of complete attention focused like a beam. He wasn't threatening anyone. He was calling in debts. The distinction mattered, and she understood it without being told. Threats were what you used when you had no leverage. Debts were what you used when you'd spent years building a network of people who owed you specific things. Matteo coordinated the physical side. She didn't have full visibility into that, but she observed the patterns. Men arriving at the service entrance, brief conversations in the garage, vehicles leaving and returning. Twice she saw Lucian and Matteo standing together over a spread of photographs on the dining room table that got turned face down when she entered the room. She didn't push on those. She understood the division. There was information she needed, and information that would only add weight she couldn't carry yet. She was useful in specific ways. She spent a morning on the phone with Carver, who was somewhere she was never told, verifying details. The second name she'd seen in the ledger, The mid-level financial figure in the Serrano operation had a business address that she'd glimpsed at the top of the spreadsheet page. She'd thought it was decorative, a file header, and hadn't flagged it in the initial reconstruction. Under Carver's patient questioning, it surfaced: a building number, a street name, a partial zip code. Carver went very quiet when she gave it to him. "Stay accessible," he said, and ended the call. She was sitting in the kitchen with the phone in her hand when Lucien came in. He looked at her face and stopped. "What did you just remember?" he said. She told him. Something shifted in his expression, a quick tightening and then a deliberate release, the physical equivalent of locking something away. "That's good," he said. "That's very good. Is it enough?" He crossed to the counter and stood with his back to her for a moment, both hands braced on the edge, looking at nothing. "It could be." He turned around. "It could be the specific point of entry we need." She looked at him. The tiredness in his face had deepened in 48 hours. Not dramatically. He wasn't the kind of person who wore exhaustion with any visibility, but she'd learned his baseline fast the way you learned the baseline of someone you were watching carefully, and this was below it. "You haven't slept," she said. "I slept." "When?" He looked at her. A small thing happened around his eyes, something that wasn't quite amusement but lived in the same neighborhood. "A few hours," he said. "That's not sleep. That's waiting in a horizontal position." He didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. And in the silence, she felt the strange geography of this situation. Two people occupying close quarters under sustained pressure, learning each other at a speed that normal circumstances would never have produced. And the intimacy of that had nothing to do with want, and everything to do with proximity and crisis, and the specific vulnerability of being known by someone in the middle of the worst version of your life. "The plan," she said. "When do you tell me what it actually is?" He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. This was new. He'd been in motion for 2 days, never quite stationary, always with the energy of someone managing something at a remove. Sitting down across from her at the kitchen table felt like a different kind of declaration. "Carver is going to create a problem for the accounting firm in Zurich," he said. "A regulatory inquiry. Enough friction to make the principals nervous without making them defensive. Nervous people make contact with the people they're nervous about. In this case, the prosecutor's office. That contact creates a digital trail. The trail gives us a window. A window into what? Into where the document actually lives. Which server? Which credentials? Which access pattern?" He folded his hands on the table. "When we have that, we have leverage. Not the document itself necessarily. We might not need it. We need enough to make the prosecutor's office believe we have it. Enough to make them understand that moving against you makes things worse, not better." She thought about this. "That's deterrence," she said, "not resolution. For now." "And Serrano?" "Serrano responds to power. If we demonstrate that you're positioned to do more damage protected than eliminated, he recalculates." His voice was steady. "He's a businessman before he's a violent man. That's the lever." She nodded slowly. It was a reasonable plan. It was a plan built on intelligence and patience and the careful application of leverage, the kind of plan that Lucien had clearly been executing versions of for most of his adult life. It was also a plan that required everything to go the way it was supposed to go. She'd spent 2 years watching things not go the way they were supposed to. She kept that thought to herself. The breach happened on a Thursday morning, 11 days after she arrived at the estate. She was upstairs when she heard it. Not the breach itself, but the quality of silence that preceded it. The kind of silence that a house makes when something wrong has entered it. She'd learned that quality over years of a different kind of wrong, and her body knew it before her mind caught up. She was out of the bed and at the door with her hand on the lock before she'd consciously decided to move. The hallway was empty. Downstairs, voices. Not raised, but clipped. The cadence of an emergency being managed. She went down. Lucien was in the study with Matteo and a woman she'd never seen. Late 30s, dark blazer, the particular physical stillness of someone trained to project authority. She was sitting. Everyone else was standing. The dynamic of it was wrong in a specific way that Ivy read in the first 2 seconds. The woman was not there as a guest. Ivy stopped in the doorway. Lucian looked at her. His face was controlled, but beneath the control was something she hadn't seen there before. The specific, compressed look of a man managing a situation that has moved outside the boundaries he built for it. "Come in," he said. "Close the door." She did. "This is Agent Renner," Lucian said. "Federal?" The woman looked at Ivy with the evaluating attention of someone doing triage. "Ms. Mercer," she said, "I need you to sit down." "I'm fine standing." Agent Renner looked at Lucian. Something passed between them that Ivy didn't have the context to decode. "We have a problem," Lucian said. "We've had a problem," Ivy said. "Which part specifically?" Renner opened the folder on the desk. She turned it to face Ivy and slid it across. A photograph. Caleb Voss, taken from a distance, on a street Ivy didn't recognize. The timestamp in the corner was from 2 days ago. "He's been meeting with Serrano's financial people," Renner said. "Not just confirming what you saw, expanding it. He's been telling them you have documentation, that you photographed the screen before you left his apartment." Ivy looked up from the photograph. "I didn't photograph anything." "I know that. You know that." Renner's voice was even. "Serrano doesn't. So they think I have physical evidence. They think you have something that could send 8 people to federal prison for the rest of their natural lives and expose a sitting federal official's criminal conduct." Renner paused. "Which makes you extremely killable," Ivy said. Mateo made a sound that wasn't quite agreement. "That's one way to put it," Renner said. She closed the folder. "Here's the other problem." She produced a second folder. This one she didn't slide across the desk. She opened it and held it at an angle, not sharing it, referencing it. "The photograph that ran in the news 11 days ago," Renner said. "We traced the source." "The prosecutor's office," Lucian said. "We already knew." "No," Renner said. "We traced it past the initial leak point." She looked at Lucian. "It came from inside your estate." The room went very quiet. Not the quiet of people processing. The quiet of people going still. Ivy looked at Lucian. His face hadn't changed, but something behind it had. A quality of absolute attention, the way his eyes moved very slightly, calculating, running backward through possibilities. "That's not possible," Mateo said. His voice was flat. Your security has a camera system that feeds to a remote monitoring account," Renner said. "The remote monitoring account was compromised 14 months ago. Whoever has access to that feed has been watching the estate for over a year." She closed the second folder. "The photograph of Ms. Mercer arriving was pulled directly from your own exterior cameras." Nobody spoke. 14 months, Lucian said. "Yes." Ivy watched him absorb this. She watched his jaw tighten, and then release and then tighten again. 14 months was before the smaller leaks Mateo had mentioned. 14 months meant the breach wasn't recent, wasn't a response to the current situation. It had been built in and running the entire time. Every conversation in this house, every arrival and departure, every plan made in the study with the door 3/4 closed. "Who has the monitoring credentials?" Mateo said. His voice had a different quality now. Stripped down, the way a voice got when someone was operating past the outer layers of self-control. "That's what we're trying to determine," Renner said. "The account is registered through 3 shell companies. We're working the chain." She looked at Lucian. "But given the timeline, given the access level, given what it would take to set this up 14 months ago and maintain it without detection." She stopped. "Someone I trusted," Lucian said. It wasn't a question. Renner said nothing. The silence was its own answer. Ivy looked at Mateo. She didn't mean to. It was a reflex, the instinct to check the nearest face for reaction when information lands. And she caught the precise moment when Mateo understood that she'd looked at him, and the precise moment when his expression registered it. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not defensiveness. Something rawer than either of those. The look of a man who has just seen himself suspected by someone he'd revised his assessment of and found the experience unexpectedly wounding. She looked away. "Why are you here?" Lucian said to Renner. Officially, I'm not here at all." She picked up the folders. "I have a personal interest in the prosecutor whose name appears in that ledger. A case I've been building for 2 years that he's been systematically undermining from inside. She held Lucian's gaze. I know what you're building. The leverage play. The Zurich thread. She paused. It won't work. Lucian was very still. Explain that, he said. The Zurich firm went dark 48 hours ago, liquidated their primary operating account, recalled their partners, and transferred their client files to a secondary custodian in a jurisdiction that will not cooperate with any regulatory inquiry Carver can generate. She let that settle. Someone warned them. The room felt smaller suddenly. Someone who knew about Carver's approach, Lucian said. Someone who knew the specific regulatory mechanism he was going to use. Renner's voice was clinical. The details of that approach were only discussed inside this house. This time the silence was different, longer, the kind that forms when a structure you've been standing on reveals itself as hollow. Lucian turned away from the room. He walked to the window and stood facing the lake. The same window, the same water, the same iron-gray surface. His shoulders were set and Ivy could see the muscles in his neck from across the room. And she thought about what it cost to hold yourself that still, when everything you'd built around a plan had just been dismantled by a single revelation. 14 months. Not a recent leak. Not someone recruited by the pressure of the current situation. Someone who had been inside for 14 months, watching, feeding, dismantling in increments small enough to be mistaken for coincidence. Who knew about Carver's mechanism? Matteo said. His voice was almost unrecognizable, compressed to almost nothing. In this room? Renner said. Everyone present. Ivy felt the shift. The way the air in a room changes when accusation enters it without being named. And outside this room, Lucian said, still facing the window. That's the question, Renner said. Matteo set both hands flat on the desk. You're going to say a name, he said to Renner. Stop threading it and say the name. Renner looked at him. We have communications metadata linking the monitoring account to a device registered inside your organization, she said. The device belongs to someone with direct access to Lucian's operational planning for the past 14 months. She paused. His name is Dario Vasquez. Dario. The name landed in Ivy's chest with the particular weight of names she'd heard without context. She knew the name, had heard it in passing, had a face she could barely place from the night of the parking structure. She looked at Lucian's back. He hadn't moved. Dario's been with me for 9 years, he said. He said it quietly, facing the window, in the tone of someone stating a fact they are simultaneously dismantling. 9 years and 2 months, Renner said. The monitoring account was opened 9 years and 1 month ago. 1 month after. 1 month after Dario Vasquez came to work for Lucian Moretti, someone had built a surveillance system into the estate's infrastructure and had been running it ever since. Nearly a decade of access. Nearly a decade of watching. Ivy heard Lucian exhale, a single, controlled breath, and then she heard him turn away from the window. His face when he came back to the room was the flattest she'd seen it. The exhaustion was gone. The controlled tension was gone. What remained was something below all of that, something fundamental and unadorned that she recognized because she'd seen it in herself in the mirror of the apartment bathroom. The expression that appears when you've stripped away every layer of management and what's left is the raw material of what you actually are. Where is he now? Lucian said. We don't know, Renner said. He left the city Tuesday. We have him on a highway camera outside Gary, Indiana, heading east. After that, nothing. He ran, Matteo said. Or was moved, Renner said. If Serrano's people got to him directly. He wasn't gotten to, Lucian said. His voice was almost inaudible. He was already there. The distinction was brutal in its specificity, and everyone in the room understood it. Being gotten to meant external pressure, coercion, a moment of weakness exploited. Being already there meant intent. Meant the 9 years weren't 9 years of loyalty with a betrayal at the end. They were 9 years of a different thing wearing the shape of loyalty. Ivy sat down. She hadn't planned to. Her legs made the decision before she did. Some structural failure of the body's ability to stay upright under the accumulated weight of what the last 11 days had produced. She found the edge of the chair and put her hands on her thighs and looked at the floor for a moment. Then she looked up at Lucian. He was looking at her, not at Matteo, not at Renner, at her. She didn't know what her face was doing. She didn't have the bandwidth to manage it. Whatever was on her face was whatever was actually there, unfiltered, and she watched him read it, and she watched something in him respond to it. Not crack. He didn't crack, but shift, move, the way deep water moved when something significant passed through it. "What does Serrano have now?" she said to Renner. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Everything Dario had access to," Renner said, "which means your location, the Zurich operation, the reconstruction you provided to Carver, and the specific intelligence about the prosecutor's involvement that you generated in this house. So they know what I remember. They know what you told Carver, and they know we can't use the Zurich thread anymore." "Correct." She looked at her hands. "So we're back to nothing," she said. "You're back to one thing," Renner said. She looked at Ivy with the full weight of an attention that had been partially withheld until this moment. "You're the only person outside their organization who has seen that document with their own eyes. Carver's reconstruction is usable, but it's derivative. It would be challenged as constructed intelligence. What you carry is primary source." She paused. "If you could testify to what you saw, she'd be dead inside a week," Matteo said. "Not if the testimony was structured correctly," Renner said. "Not if it was packaged as part of a broader evidentiary package that made eliminating her counterproductive." She looked at Lucian. "Not if she had appropriate protection." "We've seen what appropriate protection looks like," Matteo said. "We had 14 months of it." The room went sharp with that. Renner absorbed it without visible reaction. Lucian was standing in the center of the room now, Chuck. Not pacing, not moving toward anything, just standing. It was a posture Ivy hadn't seen on him before. The posture of someone who has moved through all the available positions and found none of them adequate and is now simply present in the inadequacy. "What are you offering?" he said to Renner. "Cooperation," she said. "My unit works outside the prosecutor's direct supervisory chain. We've been insulated from his reach for the past 8 months. I can offer Ms. Mercer a protected evidentiary process that doesn't run through his office." She paused. "In exchange—" "There it is," Matteo said. "In exchange," Renner continued without acknowledging him, "I need Lucian Moretti to provide the corroborating financial documentation that his organization has accumulated about the Serrano family's operations over the past 3 years. Quiet. Lucian looked at Renner. "What you're asking me to hand over would expose every operation I've run against Serrano for 3 years. Yes. It would also expose my own financial structure." "Parts of it," Renner said, "the parts that intersect with Serrano's, which is, let's be honest with each other, the cleaner parts." "It would end my business," Lucian said. Renner held his gaze. "Most of it," she said. "Yes." Ivy looked at him. She thought about what she understood of what he'd built. The clubs, the lounge, the territory, the 9 years of loyalty that turned out to be something else entirely. She thought about the sister he'd lost. She thought about the personal rules she'd inferred from the way he moved through the apartment doorway on a Tuesday night with gunfire pending. She thought about what it cost a man like Lucian Moretti to have his empire called expendable by a federal agent at a desk in his own study. "What happens to her if I say no?" Lucian said. Renner was quiet for a moment. "Then I walk out with what I have," she said, "which isn't enough. And Ms. Mercer stays in the position she's in, which is a position that gets worse every day. Serrano has time to plan, and you have one less piece of infrastructure to work with." She closed her folders, and eventually someone makes a calculation about acceptable losses. Ivy felt the sentence land. Acceptable losses. She'd been an acceptable loss before. She knew what the calculation felt like from the inside. The slow, dawning understanding that the people around you have weighed your safety against their inconvenience and found your safety wanting. She'd spent 2 years being someone's acceptable loss, and the weight of it was specific and identifiable, and she felt it now in the base of her sternum like a knuckle pressing through from the inside. "Give us the room," Lucian said. Renner stood. Matteo stayed. "You too," Lucian said to Matteo. Mateo's jaw moved. He looked at Ivy. He looked at Lucian. He left. The door closed. Lucian stood in the center of the study, and Ivy sat in the chair, and the lake outside the window was the same lake it had always been, vast and cold and completely indifferent to all of it. "You don't have to," she started. "Don't," he said. Not harshly, just a single quiet word that closed the sentence before it could become the thing she was going to say. The thing about how he hadn't asked for this, hadn't known what he was walking into on a Tuesday night with the rain coming down and an 11-year-old phone number finally being used. He sat on the edge of the desk. It was the first time she'd seen him use furniture as support rather than choosing to stand or sit deliberately, and the smallness of it, the human smallness of leaning on something, told her more about the weight he was under than anything else had. 3 years ago, he said, after the last ceasefire with Serrano, I started documenting everything their operation touched that intersected with mine. Not to use, initially, just to know, just to have. He looked at the window. The documentation became something significant. It's not everything Renner wants, but it's enough of what she wants to make the offer real. "Would using it actually end your business?" Ivy said. He thought about the question with the same quality of attention he gave everything. "The parts that need to end," he said. She looked at him. "There are parts of what I do," he said, "that I built because Elena died and nobody came." He didn't explain who Elena was. He didn't need to. She'd pieced it together across 11 days of proximity, the way you piece together someone's essential wound from the shape of everything they'd built around it. And there are parts I built because that was the logic of what I'd started. One thing required another thing to protect it. Another thing required more. He paused. The Empire is mostly the second kind now. And Renner wants you to burn the second kind. To save the first. He looked at her. To keep the part that matters. She understood what the part that mattered was. She understood it, and she didn't name it because naming it felt like a weight she didn't have the right to place on either of them in a room where everything was already too heavy. "It's my testimony she needs," Ivy said. "It's my memory. My risk." Pocha, she looked at him. "You shouldn't have to give up what you built." "The monitoring account ran for 9 years," Lucian said quietly. 9 years, Ivy. Every plan, every operation, every decision I made thinking I was protected. His voice was perfectly even, and the evenness of it was the most devastating thing in it. Whatever I had, Serrano already had. Whatever I thought was mine was already theirs. He looked at his hands. Renner isn't asking me to burn something intact. She's asking me to formalize the ash. The air in the room was very still. Outside, the lake moved. The mist had lifted and the water was dark green now in the afternoon light. Not iron anymore, something colder and deeper. Ivy stood up. She crossed the room to where he sat on the edge of the desk. She stopped 2 feet from him and she looked at him. At the tiredness that had come back into his face, and the thing beneath the tiredness that was older and less manageable, the grief of a man who had built an empire as an answer to something that couldn't actually be answered, and was only now, in this room, allowing himself to know it. "Call Renner back in," she said. He looked at her. "You understand what testifying means, what it requires from—" "Call her back in," she said again. Her voice didn't waver. "I'll do it. We'll do it together." She held his gaze. "But I need you to promise me something first." He waited. "Whatever happens after," she said, "you don't disappear." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Just slightly, just enough for both of them to hear it. "You don't sacrifice yourself and vanish. You don't become a ghost because it's cleaner." She pressed her hands flat against her thighs to stop them from shaking. "If we do this, we do it to come out the other side, both of us. Not as a noble ending, as an actual ending where we're still alive." He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up. He crossed to the door and opened it and called Renner's name into the hallway. But before Renner appeared, in the 2 seconds between the call and the sound of footsteps, Mateo came through the other doorway at the opposite end of the hall at a near run, and his face had the particular quality that faces got when something had just gone irreversibly wrong. And in his hand was his phone showing a live news feed. And on the live news feed was a press conference. and at the podium of the press conference stood a man in a dark suit whose name Ivy recognized from the spreadsheet header, and behind him stood Caleb Voss in a collared shirt, looking like someone who had recently been coached on how to appear credible, and the chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Witness in Moretti investigation comes forward. Claims woman was present during multiple criminal planning sessions." The woman in the claim was Ivy Mercer. Her name was on the chyron now. Her name in a photograph, say not the parking structure shot from 11 days ago, but something older, cleaner, taken from what looked like a social media account she'd deleted 18 months back. She was smiling in it. She looked like someone who had no idea what was coming, which was accurate, which was the point of using that particular photograph. Lucian took the phone from Mateo's hand. He watched 30 seconds of the press conference. The man at the podium, the prosecutor, Harrison Vale, whose name she'd seen in the spreadsheet header, and whose name Carver had confirmed twice and whose name Renner had been building a case against for 2 years, spoke in the measured, sorrowful tone of a public official reluctantly compelled to act. He described an ongoing investigation into organized crime. He described a young woman who had, according to a credible witness, participated willingly in multiple planning sessions connected to the Moretti organization. He used the word willingly twice. He used the word evidence 4 times without specifying what the evidence was. Caleb stood behind him and looked at the cameras with the expression of someone who had recently been told exactly what expression to use. Lucian handed the phone back. "When did this go live?" he said. 4 minutes ago, Mateo said. "It's already on 3 networks." Renner appeared in the hallway behind Mateo. She'd heard. Her face confirmed she'd heard. "This changes the timeline," she said. "How long before your unit can move on Vale?" Lucian said. "The press conference complicates a direct move against him. He's positioned himself as the aggressor. If we move on him inside the next 24 hours, it reads as retaliation, and everything we bring gets challenged as politically motivated." Her voice was measured, but underneath it was the tightness of someone watching 2 years of careful work get leveraged against her. "We need 48 hours minimum to establish independent predicate." "We don't have 48 hours, Mateo said. "I know that." "She's been publicly named," Lucian said. His voice had gone to the place below evenness, the place where evenness stopped being composure and became something colder. "They've made her a suspect, which means every hour she stays here increases her exposure and mine and makes any testimony she gives look retaliatory." "Yes," Renner said. "So Vale wanted the press conference," Ivy said. Everyone looked at her. She was standing at the edge of the hallway, both hands pressed flat against the wall behind her. She'd been listening with the particular quality of attention she'd developed over 2 years of living inside situations where understanding the logic of what was being done to you was the only agency you had. "He wanted it," she said again. "Caleb going to Serrano, the photograph from the cameras, the press conference, it's sequential. It's designed." She looked at Lucian. "He's not reacting to us. We've been reacting to him this whole time." The hallway was quiet. "She's right," Carver's voice came from the study. He'd apparently never left. "The Zurich firm going dark 2 days ago. That wasn't a response to our approach. That was already in motion. We were always 48 hours behind their timeline." "Then what is their timeline?" Mateo said. Carver appeared in the study doorway with his glasses pushed up on his forehead. "My best reading is they needed to neutralize the Ledger threat before the end of this week. Something's happening at the end of this week that requires clean exposure. No active investigations, no outstanding vulnerabilities." He looked at Renner. "You'd know better than me. What's scheduled in the Northern District this week?" Renner went still. It was a specific kind of stillness, the kind that meant she'd just connected something she'd been holding separately. "There's a grand jury convening Friday," she said slowly, "on a different case, unrelated on its face. But the presiding judge has been on Vale's radar for 8 months. She's the one jurist in the district he hasn't been able to neutralize." She paused. "If he goes into that grand jury session with no active vulnerabilities and a public narrative that frames the primary witness against him as a criminal associate, he's untouchable," Lucian said, "until the next opportunity, which might be years." The hallway felt very narrow suddenly. Ivy pushed off the wall. "Friday," she said. "That's 36 hours." "Yes," Renner said. Then we don't have a timeline problem, Ivy said. We have a location problem. She looked at Lucian. Where's the documentation? The 3 years of records you were talking about in the study. Secure location off-site, he said. How fast can you get it? Ivy, how fast? He looked at her. The look lasted 2 seconds and contained something she'd only seen in pieces before. The full weight of his attention turned on her without management, without the careful quality of observation held at a deliberate distance. Just direct, just real. 6 hours, he said. Maybe 5. Then we have 24 hours after that. She looked at Renner. What do you need from me to make the testimony bulletproof in that window? A formal recorded statement, Renner said. Delivered through my unit's secure channel, time-stamped, with corroborating documentation attached. I can have the package before a duty judge by tomorrow morning if I have everything by midnight tonight. She paused. But if you make that statement and Vale's people find out before I can get it in front of the judge, they'll move on her, Matteo said. They'll move on everything, Renner said. Lucian made a decision. Ivy could see it happen, not in a gesture or a word, but in the quality of stillness that preceded action in him, the moment before the engine engaged. Matteo, he said, get the car, call ahead to the off-site and tell them I'm coming personally. He looked at Renner. You stay here with her, 2 of my men on the perimeter. Nobody in or out except through you. Lucian, Matteo said. The way he said it carried the weight of 11 years on everything that couldn't be said in a single word said in the tone of it. I know, Lucian said. Going personally. I know. If they're watching the off-site, they're watching everything, Lucian said. That's been true for 9 years. Moving carefully hasn't protected us. He looked at Matteo directly. We move. Matteo looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Ivy. The look was brief and complicated, and she didn't have the full translation of it, but part of it she understood. The part that was the look of a man recalibrating something he'd been wrong about. He left to get the car. Lucian turned to Ivy. Lock the study from inside, he said. Don't open it for anyone except Renner or me. I'm not staying in a locked room, she said. Ivy. I've spent 2 years staying in locked rooms. Her voice was even. I will work with Renner on the statement. I will be here when you get back. But I'm not going in a room and waiting. His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Fine, he said. It wasn't surrender. It was a man recognizing the line where an argument cost more than the ground it was defending. He left without another word. She listened to the front door close and then stood in the hallway with Renner and the distant sound of the lake and the 36 hours that were already becoming 35. The recorded statement took 4 hours. Renner was methodical and thorough and patient in the way of someone who understood that the value of what she was building depended entirely on its structural integrity under challenge. She asked the same questions multiple ways. She asked Ivy to describe not just what she'd seen, but the physical circumstances of seeing it, where she was standing, what the light was like, how long she'd been in the doorway, what her emotional state was, and how that emotional state might have affected her attention and retention. Ivy answered everything. The 4th time Renner asked her to describe the position of the 2nd column of figures on the spreadsheet, Ivy felt the edge of her patience, but she answered again, precisely, without letting the irritation into her voice. She understood the repetition. She'd been on the wrong side of enough interrogations, informal ones, Caleb's particular brand of cross-examination conducted in low voices in the dark, to recognize the difference between harassment and construction. By 10:30, the statement was complete and recorded and encrypted, and Renner was working the transmission. Ivy sat at the kitchen table and drank cold coffee and listened to the house. At 11:15, Lucian wasn't back. At 11:40, he wasn't back. At midnight, her phone, charged now, blessedly charged, showed no messages. Renner looked up from her laptop at 12:15 and saw Ivy's face. He said 6 hours, Renner said. It's been 6.5, Ivy said. The off-site is 90 minutes out. If there was any complication with the retrieval... How do we know there wasn't a complication, Ivy said. How do we know the off-site wasn't already compromised? Renner looked at her with the full weight of someone deciding how much to say. "We don't," she said. Ivy stood up. "Where are you going?" Renner said. "To find out," Ivy said. "You can't. Call Mateo," Ivy said. "Right now. Call him and put it on speaker so I can hear." Renner looked at her for 2 seconds. Then she called. The phone rang 6 times and went to voicemail. They looked at each other. Renner called again. 4 rings. Voicemail. "That doesn't mean—" Renner started. "Call the men on the perimeter," Ivy said. Renner was already moving. She was out of the kitchen and into the front hallway, and she opened the front door, and the perimeter position to the left of the entry was empty, not positioned away, not moved, empty. The small folding chair that one of Lucian's men had been using was still there. The coffee thermos still there. Still warm when Renner touched it without thinking. "How long?" Ivy said. "Minutes," Renner said. Her voice had changed completely. The measured federal agent quality gone, replaced by something more stripped and operational. "He was here minutes ago." "They moved on the perimeter," Ivy said, "which means they know what's in the statement, which means—" "The transmission," Renner said. She was already back inside, already at her laptop. Her face changed when she looked at the screen. "What?" Ivy said. "The transmission went through," Renner said, "but there's a flag on the receiving end. Someone logged into the receiving account 4 minutes ago from an unrecognized device." She looked up. The package was accessed before it reached the duty judge. The statement, the 4 hours of painstaking, methodical construction, the timestamps and the corroborating architecture, accessed, possibly copied, definitely compromised by whoever had gotten to the receiving account. Vale's people, inside Renner's own unit. "You have another leak," Ivy said. Renner's jaw was set, and her hands were on the laptop, and she looked like someone who had just watched 2 years of work get picked up and used against her like a weapon. "Go upstairs," she said. "Lock the—" The back door opened. Not forced, opened. With a key. The particular sound of a correctly operated lock, which was worse than a forced entry because it meant whoever was coming through had been given access or had taken it, and both options were equally bad. Ivy grabbed the closest thing that was a weapon, which was a heavy ceramic mug on the counter, which was ridiculous, and she knew it was ridiculous, and she held it anyway because the body needed to hold something. Mateo came through the door. He was alone. His jacket was torn at the left shoulder, and there was blood on his right hand. Not a wound, blood from contact, transferred. He was breathing hard, and his eyes went immediately to both of them in a sweep that was checking and calculating simultaneously. "Where is he?" Ivy said. Mateo set his keys on the counter. His hands weren't steady. "They hit the off-site," he said. "Serrano's people. 6 of them. They'd been there waiting." He looked at Ivy. Lucian got the documentation out. He got it clear, but they boxed the exit route. The ceramic mug was in her hand, and the kitchen was very bright and very small. "Where is he?" she said again. "The shipping terminal on the river," Mateo said, "south of Chinatown. They moved him there." He looked at Renner. "Serrano's not going to wait for Friday. He knows about the statement. He knows the documentation is in play. He needs this resolved tonight." "Resolved," Ivy said. Mateo looked at her. "How many men does Serrano have at that terminal?" Renner said. "When I left, 12. He paused. "More coming." "Your men," Renner said. 8 who I can reach. 2 of them are already moving." He looked at Lucian's phone that he'd apparently brought back and set on the counter beside his keys. "He made me take his phone before they separated us. The documentation is in a drive he had on him." His jaw moved. "They don't know what he's carrying. If they find it, they won't need Ivy anymore," Renner said. The room processed that. "Or you," Mateo said to Renner. "Or me. Or anyone who's touched this in the last 11 days. He looked at Ivy with the look from earlier, the revised look, the look that had something in it she hadn't expected from him. If that drive falls into Vale's hands tonight, the grand jury on Friday becomes a formality. He buries it, cleans his exposure, and this is over. Ivy set the ceramic mug down on the counter. She looked at the place where she'd set it for 1 second. Then she looked at Mateo. Take me to the terminal, she said. No, Matteo said. I'm not asking. Lucian told me. Lucian is at a shipping terminal with 12 men and a drive that ends all of this, and I'm the reason he went to get it. Her voice was completely level. Take me to the terminal. You'd be walking into... I know what I'd be walking into. She looked at him without blinking. I've been walking into things for 2 years. The difference is, this time I'm choosing to. Matteo stared at her. Renner said, I'm coming too. Matteo looked at the ceiling. He looked at Lucian's phone on the counter. He looked at the door he'd come through and the night outside it, and the 32 years of his life that had brought him to a kitchen where a woman who'd arrived here with nothing but wet hair and a bruised wrist was telling him where they were going next. Get in the car, he said. The drive to the terminal took 22 minutes, and Matteo drove it like he was trying to make it 15. The rain had started again, not the hard rain of 11 days ago, but a thin, persistent mist that sat on the windshield between wiper passes and turned the city into something blurred and amber-edged. Ivy sat in the back seat. Renner was in the front with Matteo, her weapon already out, checked, holstered again. A series of actions she performed without drama in the way of someone for whom the preparation was automatic. Ivy had no weapon. She was aware of this the way you were aware of a missing tooth with your tongue. Not constantly, just whenever she moved her attention in that direction. She thought about Caleb. She thought about the press conference, his coached expression. The word willingly used twice by a man whose name was in a ledger that was currently inside a jacket pocket at a shipping terminal in the rain. She thought about the version of herself that had crouched on a kitchen floor with 11% battery and a phone number she'd promised never to use. She thought about what Lucian had said in the study. The Empire is mostly the second kind now. The car turned south, and the city changed, and the river appeared between buildings, dark and flat, and catching the refinery lights from across the water in long orange lines. The terminal materialized from the darkness, a series of steel corrugated buildings surrounded by container stacks, floodlit in some sections and completely dark in others, the kind of industrial geography that had 1,000 places to be and 1,000 places to be cornered in. Matteo cut the lights 3 blocks out. 2 of my men are already inside the fence, he said quietly. East wall. They've been maintaining visual on the main building for the last 40 minutes. He looked in the rearview mirror at Ivy. Lucian is in the secondary structure, the long building at the south end. 3 confirmed guards on the exterior. Unknown interior. Serrano himself, Renner said. Not confirmed on site. But this is his operation. His people. Matteo looked at the terminal ahead of them. They haven't moved Lucian since my men established visual, which means they're waiting for something. Vale, Renner said. They're waiting for confirmation that the statement package is neutralized before they decide what to do with him. How long before they get that confirmation? Ivy said. Matteo's hands were on the wheel. My guess, he said. An hour, maybe less. Outside the car, the mist moved across the terminal lights, and the river ran dark behind it, and the containers stood in their rows like a city built by people who didn't care about windows. Ivy looked at the terminal and breathed. In through the nose. 4 counts. The technique Lucian had shown her during the blackout drills in the early days at the estate. Not a breathing exercise, he'd said, just a way to tell your body where the authority was. Just a way to say, I'm here. I'm deciding. Not the fear. Me. She opened the car door. There's something you should know, Matteo said. She stopped. Caleb is there, Matteo said. At the terminal. My man spotted him 20 minutes ago arriving with Serrano's financial people. He held her gaze in the rear view. He's not a bystander anymore. He made himself part of this. She thought about the knife against her face. She thought about the word willingly on a news chyron. I know, she said. She got out of the car. The mist touched her face and the river smell came off the water. Cold, mineral, the smell of a city's working infrastructure, the unglamorous underneath of everything. Her shoes hit the wet gravel of the road shoulder, and she stood for a moment in the dark between the car and the terminal fence line, while Matteo and Renner got out behind her and the plan, such as it was, such as it could be with 30 minutes and 8 men and 1 federal agent and no weapon and a drive that had to come out of that building intact, assembled itself in her mind with the terrible clarity that arrived when all the options had narrowed to one. Matteo came up beside her. "The east entrance is the softest point," he said quietly. "My men can create a distraction at the north end. In the window that gives us, we have maybe 4 minutes to reach the secondary structure." "What's inside?" she said. "Unknown." "How many inside with Lucian?" "Unknown." "You're asking me to go in on a lot of unknowns," she said. "I'm asking you to wait here," he said. "I'm going in on the unknowns." She looked at him. "You need me in there," she said. "Not as backup, as the reason they hesitate." She held his gaze. "I'm the thing this whole night is about. If I walk in there, Serrano's people have a choice to make. Do they move on Lucian with me present and risk losing any leverage, or do they wait?" She paused. "A few seconds of that hesitation is everything." Matteo was quiet for a moment that was longer than most of his silences. "If this goes wrong," he said. "I know," she said. "You really aren't slow," he said again. And this time it was different than when he'd said it in the kitchen. Less acknowledgement, more something else. Something that had the shape of what people felt when they were surprised by each other in ways they hadn't prepared for. Renner appeared at her left. "Ready," she said. In the distance, at the north end of the terminal, a floodlight went out. Then another. Then a sound. Not gunfire, something else. Something percussive and industrial. A sound designed to move attention north without revealing its source. Matteo looked at the east entrance fence line. 4 minutes, he said. "Move." They moved through the gap in the fence in a line. Matteo first, Renner second, Ivy third. And the wet gravel of the terminal yard came up under her feet, and the containers closed around them, and somewhere ahead in the dark and the rain, inside a long steel building at the south end of a working terminal on a river in a city that was about to wake up to a Friday morning that would determine everything, Lucian Moretti was waiting in the dark with a drive in his pocket, and the east wall of the terminal smelled like rust and river water, and the particular cold that came off steel containers that had been sitting in the rain for weeks. Ivy moved through it with her shoulder against the corrugated surface of a container stack, and her breathing controlled. 4 counts in, hold, release. And the gravel under her feet was wet enough to muffle sound if she placed each step deliberately, heel to toe. The way you moved when the difference between heard and unheard was the difference between everything. Matteo was 6 feet ahead of her. Renner was between them. The north end distraction was still running. She could hear it, a deep rhythmic banging that her mind kept trying to resolve into something identifiable and couldn't. One of Matteo's men, doing exactly what was needed, costing himself exposure to buy them these 4 minutes in the dark. The secondary structure appeared between 2 container stacks, longer than she'd expected from Matteo's description, maybe 200 feet of corrugated steel with 3 loading bay doors along its face, 2 of them closed and 1 standing open about 18 inches at the bottom. Light bled through the gap. Not much light. Working light, the kind that came from portable flood lamps rather than overhead installation, which meant it was being powered independently, which meant whoever set this up had planned for a duration. Matteo stopped. He held up one fist, and they both stopped behind him. 2 guards on the south face of the building. She could see them from the gap between containers, standing rather than moving, which meant bored, which meant this had been running longer than comfortable. One of them had his phone out, the screen lighting his face blue-white in the dark. The other was smoking. Matteo turned back to her and Renner. He pointed at the open loading bay door. He held up 2 fingers and pointed at the guards. He looked at Renner. Renner nodded. She moved left, circling the container stack, disappearing from Ivy's sight line. Matteo looked at Ivy. "Stay here," he said. Barely a sound. Less than a whisper. She looked at him and didn't move, and he read her face and exhaled something that wasn't quite a word. They waited 30 seconds. Then Renner's voice came from the far side of the building. Not loud, not a shout, just enough to carry, shaped like confusion, like a woman who had taken a wrong turn somewhere in an industrial yard at night and was looking for someone to tell her she'd made a mistake. The performance was completely convincing because it wasn't a performance. It was a woman putting herself in the sight line of 2 armed guards and relying on the half-second of processing time that created, The moment between perceived threat and response to do what she needed to do. The guard with the phone put it in his pocket. Both guards moved toward her voice. Mateo moved. Ivy moved with him. The loading bay door was cold under her fingers and heavier than it looked. She had to put her weight into it to widen the gap enough, the metal groaning faintly, and then she was inside and the light was different, warmer, and the smell changed to diesel and sawdust and something metallic. She identified after a moment as blood. The interior of the building was one long open space broken by support columns and a series of heavy wooden pallets stacked in the middle third. The portable flood lamps were set up at the far end, 3 of them, casting everything beyond the pallets in harsh white light that made the near half of the building even darker by contrast. She counted 4 men she could see, 2 near the lamps, one by the east wall, one moving between the pallet stacks. Lucian was at the far end, against the wall. She saw him and her chest did something involuntary. A single, hard contraction that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the particular relief of a specific dread being resolved. He was on his feet. Both hands were secured behind him to a structural support column with what looked like zip ties, not rope. The financial people, she thought, the kind of restraint carried by people who planned ahead. There was blood on his left temple, dried, a stripe of it that tracked down to his jaw. His shirt was torn at the collar. His face, when the light caught it, was very still. He saw her before the guard saw her. She watched his expression do something she'd never seen it do. Break open, just for a second, just for the duration of a single breath, before the control came back down over it. Not relief. More fundamental than relief. The thing underneath relief. The thing that relief was the managed version of. She looked away from his face before the moment could cost either of them something they couldn't afford yet. Mateo was moving along the east wall toward the man there, using the pallet shadow. She tracked him with her peripheral vision and kept her main attention on the 2 men near the lamps, calculating the interval between when they saw her and when Mateo could close the distance. The man near the east wall turned. He turned at the wrong moment, at precisely the angle that let him see both Mateo and Ivy simultaneously. And his mouth opened, and Mateo hit him before the sound came out. A single, efficient strike that folded him against the wall and dropped him without ceremony. The 2 men near the lamps heard it. Everything happened in the next 4 seconds. The first man went for his weapon. Mateo was already across the room, already inside the draw distance, and the weapon discharged once into the ceiling. An enormous sound in the steel enclosure, a sound that Ivy felt in her back teeth, before Mateo controlled the arm, and the second shot went nowhere. The second man had his weapon up and clear, and was finding his sight line, and Ivy moved without deciding to move, toward him rather than away, because away was open space and toward was inside his optimal range. And she hit him low and sideways with everything she had in her body, which was not much by any objective measure, but it moved his aim by 18 inches, and Renner came through the loading bay door with her weapon drawn and said, "Stop," in a voice that carried the full institutional authority of someone who was done being patient, and the man stopped. The fourth man, the one moving between the pallets, had disappeared. 3 seconds of compressed silence. Then a voice came from behind the center pallet stack, and it was a voice Ivy knew. "Nobody move," Caleb said. "Nobody do anything for a second." He came out from behind the pallet with his arm around a man she didn't recognize. A smaller man, 50s, in a good coat that was completely wrong for the setting. The financial person. The mid-level Serrano figure whose name she'd seen in the spreadsheet header, who had apparently been here to supervise. Caleb had his forearm across the man's throat and a gun against his jaw. The same basic geometry as the fire escape 12 days ago, except this time Caleb was using a hostage instead of her, and the gun was real. Caleb's eyes found her immediately. "Of course," he said. His voice had an edge of something, not quite hysteria, something that had been adjacent to hysteria for a long time and had recently moved closer. "Of course you're here. Of course you came." He looked at Mateo and Renner and his arm tightened. "Put the guns down." Nobody put anything down. "Caleb," Ivy said. "No." His voice cracked on the single syllable. "No. Don't do the thing. Don't say my name like that. Like you're handling me, like I'm a problem to be managed. I'm not. You ran, he said. The crack in his voice was something more than anger. It was the sound of someone whose entire architecture of self-justification was audible in two words. You just left, after everything. You just left and you called him. His eyes went to Lucian against the wall. And now I'm here, and this is all. He stopped. His breathing was ragged. This is not what I wanted. What did you want? Ivy said. I wanted you to come back. He said it like it was an answer, like it was a complete answer, like the logic of it was self-evident and the fact that she didn't understand it was the problem. I wanted things to go back. I wanted. You put my name on a news chyron, she said. Her voice was even, completely even. You stood behind a man who was going to prison, and you called me a criminal on television. That was. He stopped. His jaw worked. I didn't have a choice. By then I was already in it. The Serrano people, the deal I made. By then it was already. You had every choice, she said. You made them. Something in his face went through several expressions quickly and landed on something that was terrible in its simplicity. The look of a man who had finally run out of the architecture that was holding the self-justification up. The look of the structure after the supports gave. The man in Caleb's grip made a small sound. Matteo shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. Put it down, Caleb, Ivy said. This is done. Whatever you thought this was going to give you, it's done. If I put it down, they'll. Renner is federal, Ivy said. Her unit is independent of Vale's office. You cooperate with her, you have something. You go further down this road, you have nothing. She held his gaze. You've been a weapon in someone else's hand since the night you called Serrano's people. That's what they used you for. You want to stay that, or you want to be the person who put the weapon down? The gun trembled slightly against the man's jaw. Why would you help me? Caleb said. His voice was very small. After everything. I'm not helping you, she said. I'm giving you an accurate description of your options. The distinction registered on his face. He lowered the gun. Renner crossed the space in 2 steps and had him controlled and disarmed before the man in the expensive coat had fully processed that he'd been released. The man stumbled forward and sat down on the edge of a pallet and put his head in his hands. Matteo was already at the back wall with a blade cutting the zip ties. Lucian's hands came free. He stood for a moment with his hands at his sides, getting blood back into them, and he looked at the room with the evaluating look, checking, cataloging. Then he looked at Ivy. She was standing 12 feet from him in the harsh light of the portable floods, and she was still breathing hard from the 4-second collision with the second guard, and there was a bruise forming on her right forearm where she'd made contact and her hands weren't entirely steady. She looked like what she was. A woman who had walked into an industrial building in the rain to get someone out and had not done it gracefully and had done it anyway. He crossed to her. He didn't say anything. He looked at the bruise forming on her arm, and then he looked at her face, and the look lasted long enough to constitute its own kind of statement, the kind that didn't require language because language would only reduce it. The drive, she said. Her voice was slightly unsteady, and she resented it. He reached into his interior jacket pocket and held it up. A small thing. Black, rectangular, the size of 2 thumbnails. 3 years of documentation, 9 months of careful assembly, everything that was going to end what needed to end. Still there. She exhaled. Renner's transmission was compromised, she said. The statement. I know. He looked past her at Renner, who was zip-tying Caleb's wrists with the zip ties that had recently been on Lucian's. Is she still viable? Her unit is. The leak is in her receiving infrastructure, not her chain of command. Ivy looked at the drive. If that goes directly to her supervising judge, bypassing the digital channel entirely, does it hold? A physical delivery, Renner said from across the room. She'd heard. To the judge directly. Yes, it holds. She looked at Lucian. Is the documentation on that drive what you said it was? Yes. Then we need to move. She looked at her watch. The grand jury convenes at 9. We have 6 hours and 20 minutes to get a physical package before a sitting judge, which means leaving this building in the next 15 minutes. The man in the expensive coat was still sitting on the pallet with his head in his hands. Matteo looked at him. That one's yours, Matteo said to Renner. I have him, Renner said. Outside the building, a sound. Both of Mateo's men appearing at the loading bay. Alive, functional, the north end distraction completed. Mateo looked at them, and something in his shoulders that had been set for the last hour released by degrees. The two guards that Renner had neutralized outside were zip-tied to a container bracket by the time Ivy and Lucian came through the loading bay door into the mist. Caleb was between Renner's men, walking with the particular gait of someone who has just set down something heavy that they've been carrying for too long and doesn't know yet what it feels like to move without it. Ivy looked at him as she passed. He looked back. There was nothing in her that wanted to say something more to him. There was nothing that wanted resolution or acknowledgement or the particular transaction people sometimes needed to feel like a chapter had closed. The chapter was closed, not because of anything said or exchanged, but because she was walking toward a car in the rain at 3 a.m, and he was walking in the opposite direction, and both of those facts were simply true now. She looked forward and kept walking. The documentation package reached Federal District Judge Marin Chu at 6:47 in the morning. Renner delivered it physically, by hand, accompanied by her unit supervisor and 2 deputy marshals she'd called at 4 a.m., with the particular tone that got deputy marshals out of bed. The drive and the recovered statement, rebuilt from Renner's local backup after the transmission compromise was established, were delivered together in a sealed evidence envelope with a chain of custody notation that would survive any challenge. Judge Chu reviewed the core materials for 40 minutes. At 7:29, she signed an emergency order suspending the grand jury session pending a judicial inquiry into the conduct of Assistant U.S. Attorney Harrison Vale. At 7:51, Vale was notified. At 8:30, he resigned. The resignation didn't come with an admission. It came with a statement about health and family and the weight of public service. The standard language of men who have been cornered and are trying to control how much of the collapse is visible. The statement was 4 sentences long and was released through a communications lawyer and was immediately understood by everyone who read it for exactly what it was. Ivy was sitting in Renner's field office when she heard. She was on her 4th cup of coffee, which was terrible coffee from a machine in the hallway, and she was wearing the same clothes she'd worn to the terminal because there hadn't been time to think about clothes, and she was watching Renner move between phone calls with the focused energy of someone who had waited 2 years for this morning and was not going to mismanage a single minute of it. When the resignation hit, Renner stopped walking and looked at her phone and stood still for 4 seconds. Then she looked at Ivy. "He's gone," she said. Ivy wrapped both hands around the terrible coffee cup. "And the Serrano case," she said. "The documentation gives us everything we need to build the financial fraud charges independently of Vale's office. New prosecutors, clean chain, no contamination." Renner sat down across from her. "It'll take time. Cases like this take time. But the foundation is solid. Serrano himself will be indicted within 6 months, maybe less." She paused. "His financial infrastructure is what we prosecute first. When the money goes, the operation goes." Ivy looked at the coffee cup. "And me," she said. "The charges Vale filed, the witness statement from Caleb." "Vale filed nothing official," Renner said. "It was a press statement, not an indictment. With him gone and Caleb cooperating with our office," she paused at the specific word. "Yes, he's cooperating, fully. He gave us 6 hours of recorded statement beginning at 4 this morning." She let that settle. "With his cooperation and Vale gone and the documentation establishing what the ledger actually was, there is no credible case against you. There's nothing." Ivy absorbed this. It should have felt like something large. She'd been expecting it to feel like something large. The moment when the case against her collapsed, when the chyron with her name on it became retroactively meaningless, when the word willingly stopped having any weight. She'd been expecting a sensation corresponding to the size of what had been threatening her. It felt like an exhale, not a dramatic one, just a breath, let out slowly, the body completing a process it had been holding for 11 days. "Okay," she said. Renner looked at her with an expression that had something personal in it for the first time, something that had gotten through the federal agent layer, through the 2 years building this case layer, to whatever was underneath. "Okay," Renner agreed. Well, she didn't see Lucian until nearly noon. He'd been separated from her by the machinery of the morning, sit. Interviews, documentation, the logistical processing of a night that had produced 6 people in federal custody and a resignation and a suspended grand jury, and the kind of paperwork that didn't care that everyone involved had been awake for 30 hours. She'd seen Matteo briefly, in a hallway, and he'd looked at her and said something with his eyes that she translated as, "We got here," and she'd nodded, and they'd both moved on because the morning required movement. Lucian found her on the steps outside the federal building at 11:58. She was sitting on the top step in the pale November sun, the first actual sun in 11 days, thin and cold but present, the kind of sun that didn't warm you but proved it still existed. She was looking at nothing specific. The street below was doing what Chicago streets did at noon, moving, loud, indifferent to the specific weight of the previous 12 hours. He sat down beside her, not at a careful distance, next to her, their shoulders almost touching. She looked at him. The blood had been cleaned from his temple, but the bruise was visible now in the daylight, a dark purple mark along the bone, not serious, the kind that would be gone in a week. The tear in his shirt collar was still there. He looked tired in the complete, uncurated way of someone who had finally allowed the management of exhaustion to lapse. He looked human. She'd thought that before, in pieces, at moments. This was the first time it was simply true, without qualification. "Renner's unit is going to want to debrief you again this week," he said. "I know. Probably several times. The Serrano case is going to be a long process." "I know that too." She looked at the street. "And you?" He was quiet for a moment. "The documentation I provided establishes my cooperation with the federal investigation," he said. "Renner's unit has significant discretion in how they characterize my role in the evidentiary process." He paused. "There will be legal proceedings. There are parts of what I've operated that will be examined." He said it with the directness of someone who had been sitting with this knowledge long enough that the delivery of it had become clean. "I'm not walking away untouched." "How untouched are you walking away?" she said. "The clubs, the lounge, the legitimate infrastructure survives. With oversight." He looked at his hands. "The rest is already in process. Has been since I made the decision in the study." He looked at her. "I told you the empire was mostly the second kind." "You did," she said. "I meant it." She looked at him, at the bruise on his temple and the torn collar, and the hands that had been zip-tied to a column 3 hours ago and were now resting on his knees in the pale sun with the complete stillness that was simply his, that she'd stopped finding unnerving sometime in the first week and had started finding instead like the stillness of something solid. "You should sleep," she said. "Soon." He looked at the street. "There's something I need to say first." She waited. "When I gave you that number," he said, 3 months ago, I told myself it was practical, a safety measure, the reasonable thing to do given what I knew about your situation." He paused. "That was true. It was also—" He stopped. The pause had a quality she recognized, the pause of a man for whom precision in language mattered, who was currently working with a material that resisted precision. "There were other people I might have given a number to over the years, people in situations that concerned me. I didn't." He looked at her. "I gave you the number because I didn't want to not have given it. The distinction matters." She looked at him. "The distinction matters," she agreed. The street below moved. A bus went past and obscured everything for a moment in its noise and exhaust. And when it cleared, the street was the same street, and the sun was the same thin sun, and Lucian was sitting next to her with their shoulders almost touching. "I'm going to need time," she said. "I don't know what I'm doing next or where I'm going or what any of this looks like on the other side of it." She kept her eyes on the street. "I've been in survival mode for 2 years. I don't know what I'm like when I'm not surviving something." "Neither do I," he said. "For what it's worth." She looked at him. "We could find out," he said, not as a proposal with weight behind it, something quieter, more provisional, the offer of a direction rather than a destination. She looked at his face in the thin sun and thought about the number she'd saved under one initial. She thought about the card she'd almost thrown away 4 times. She thought about every wall she'd built and every distance she'd maintained and the $12 lock that had been the last wall and the last distance. And she thought about the fact that she was sitting here in the November sun with a bruise on her forearm and terrible federal building coffee still in her system and a future that had no particular shape yet, and that the absence of shape was, for the first time in 2 years, something that felt like possibility rather than threat. "Okay," she said. He didn't say anything. He didn't reach for her hand or make a gesture that would have given the moment a cinematic quality it didn't need. He simply sat there next to her, both of them facing the street, in the uncomplicated fact of being two people who had come through something and were still present on the other side of it. That was enough. It was exactly enough. 6 months later, the Serrano financial indictments came down on a Wednesday. Ivy read about them in a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, which was a habit she'd developed in the small coastal town in Northern California where she'd been living since February, a habit born partly from the pleasure of deliberate slowness and partly from the fact that the cafe she ran didn't have reliable Wi-Fi before 10 in the morning, and she'd stopped resenting that somewhere around the third week. The cafe was small, 8 tables inside, 4 on the narrow deck that faced the water. She'd found it through a real estate listing that Renner's administrative assistant had forwarded to her, half joking, and then not joking when Ivy responded within an hour. The previous owner had run it for 20 years and wanted out before another winter, and the price reflected that urgency, and Ivy had used the money she'd been saving in increments across 2 years of waitressing. Money she'd saved without a specific plan for it, money that turned out to have been waiting for exactly this. She'd learned to make coffee properly in the first month. She'd learned the names of the fishermen who came in before dawn by the second. She'd learned that the sound of the Pacific in November was different from the sound of Lake Michigan, less urgent, more ancient, the sound of something that had been doing this since before there were people to listen to it. She was happy, she thought sometimes, standing behind the counter in the mornings with the fog still on the water. Not consistently, not without the residue that 2 years of a certain kind of living left on a person, but in the way of someone who had chosen the specific details of their daily life and found that the choosing itself was its own kind of quiet satisfaction. Mateo had called her once, in March, not about anything operational. The legal proceedings were managed through attorneys in Renner's office and didn't require her involvement beyond the scheduled depositions. He'd called to tell her that Fetch, the young man with the once broken jaw, who'd taken a shoulder wound on the night of the Southside apartment, was going to be fine and had apparently decided to go back to school. She told him she was glad. He'd asked how the cafe was. She told him it was good. There was a pause in the call that had several things in it, none of which were said because they didn't need to be. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," she said. She meant it. One. The bell above the cafe door rang at 7:43 on a Thursday evening in late October, after the last table had gone and the chairs were half stacked, and the fog was doing its nightly thing with the water outside. She was at the counter with her back turned, and she heard the bell, and she knew. Not from any mystical apprehension of it, from the specific quality of the sound, or more precisely, from the quality of the silence that followed it. The particular weight of someone standing in a doorway, deciding whether they were welcome. She turned around. Lucian stood at the entrance in a dark coat. He was thinner than when she'd last seen him, which had been in a federal building hallway in May, briefly, between scheduled depositions, both of them in the company of attorneys. His hair was slightly longer. The bruise on his temple was long gone, replaced by nothing. Just the face she'd learned across 11 days of proximity and 6 months of distance. Older, she thought, or more precisely, less managed. The deliberate quality that used to sit over everything had loosened somehow, as if some internal directive toward control had been revised or simply exhausted. He looked like someone who had been through a dismantling and had not entirely reassembled yet and was not in a hurry to. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached under the counter and got a second mug and poured coffee from the pot that she hadn't yet switched off and set it on the counter. He came in and sat on the stool across from her. He wrapped both hands around the mug, an echo she didn't call attention to, of her in the kitchen at 2 in the morning 6 months ago, hands around a mug, both of them in the stripped-down aftermath of something large. "How did you find it?" she said. "Renner's assistant," he said. "Same as you." She almost smiled. "The proceedings," she said. "How do they stand?" "Closing arguments completed last week," he said. "The attorneys are confident." He looked at the mug. "I'll owe the federal government a significant sum and a significant period of supervised cooperation. The timeline is another year, maybe 18 months. He paused. After that, he stopped. He looked at her. "I don't know what after that looks like. I haven't planned that far." She thought about what she'd told him on the federal building steps, about not knowing what she was like when she wasn't surviving something, about needing time to find out. She'd found out, in pieces, across 6 months of early mornings and fog and fishermen's names and the specific satisfaction of pouring coffee well. She was still finding out. "There's a place down the road," she said. "Rents furnished rooms by the month. The woman who owns it makes better coffee than I do, which I find professionally concerning." He looked at her. "Month to month," she said. "No architecture, no plan." She held his gaze. "Just—" She stopped. She thought about the word and didn't find a better one. "Just here." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the fog moved across the water, and the cafe windows went gray with it, and the sound of the Pacific came in around the doorframe. That old, patient sound, the sound of something that had no investment in any outcome and simply continued. "Just here," he said. She picked up her own mug. "The coffee gets better after the first cup," she said. "Give it a minute." He looked at the mug in his hands. He looked at the fog on the water outside the window. He looked at her, not with the cataloging attention, not with the quality of someone examining for damage or assessing for threat, just looking. The way you looked at something that was simply what it was, without the weight of everything you'd needed it to be. "Okay," he said. The fog moved. The water kept doing what water did. The bell above the door was still now, and the cafe was warm, and outside the October coast was dark and enormous, and entirely indifferent to the two people sitting at a counter with their hands around their mugs, saying nothing, in the particular quiet of people who had come through something and found, on the other side of it, that they were still who they were. Changed, worn down to something more essential, uncertain of most things, but present. That was enough. That had always been enough.